welcome to Jade Gaming. I am Adam. Today I'm going to be doing a review of the Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars role-playing system. I've been playing in a game that one of my friends has been running for a while now. He's pretty much combined the two. They're compatible systems, and there's a fourth one that's coming out, soon. Ultimately, they have different species, career specializations, which are like your class, different information on organizations, planets, I believe some different equipment, certainly different adversaries, like for your, opponent, adversary list, things like that. So there's different material in the two books, and they're each fully supported with support books, cards, Game Master screens. They each have their own beginner box. So they can be considered completely separate systems, but they are also completely compatible systems. With the Edge of the Empire being the outer rim, outside of the Empire's control, and the Age of Rebellion being being a member of the Rebellion fighting against the Empire, as the different flavors, essentially, of the two different but the same game. I want to go over sort of, some stuff about them. Personally, as I said, these are a friend of mine who's been running the game. Personally, I just have the two beginner boxes that I got. He got one of them for the dice, and then ended up just getting a second set of dice himself. And of course, the dice have been useful, but as a player, I have also very much found the character folio, or rather, just anyone from the box, to be useful. Ultimately, the boxes are flimsy. I've been using a Pathfinder Pawns box for the actual storage and transportation of everything. But I want to go over why I found this useful and what I've been doing as far as playing first, and explain the dice essentially. Because I take the character folio and I put my character sheet right where theirs was, and I use it because the dice are funky. They have different symbols, some blank sides, whatever. Essentially, here's what the dice are called down at the bottom. Here are the good things and bad things that the dice can mean, because there are the different symbols on them. Essentially, a failure and a success cancel each other out to determine whether or not you succeed. Obviously, you want more successes than failures. Triumphs count as successes, whereas despair count as failures, but they also trigger powerful negative or positive consequences. Advantage and threat are essentially good stuff and bad stuff. So if you get a bunch of success, but you have some threat that aren't canceled out by advantage, then you succeed with bad stuff, or you might fail with good stuff. Or you could fail with extra bad stuff. It's, so that's sort of the idea behind rolling the dice. The blue and black dice are minor dice that some abilities give you. But, so they're minor dice. They're not the most common ones. The force dice, I believe, might have something to do with the force-using characters. But for the most part, it is what we've rolled at the beginning for obligation, which is a bit of a story component. The primary dice that you use are going to be your ability dice, your proficiency dice, difficulty dice, and challenge dice. Essentially, depending on how difficult it is, the Game Master will assign a certain number of difficulty dice and possibly challenge dice. Essentially, challenge dice being worse than a normal difficulty dice. And then depending on your skills, essentially, essentially what you would do the dice check for is for a skill. And let's say on this one, if I was doing, I think stealth was something this character did. Stealth and heavy range. But yeah, you see I have two boxes filled in here, and stealth is agility. If you go up to agility, it's 4, which means that ultimately there would be 4 dice, because the higher of the two is 4, but because the other one is 2, I take 2 of those dice, and I replace them with the higher value. So that would be my positive, and then, depending on the negative value, how difficult the challenge was, I'd roll that. Obviously, blanks mean nothing. Let's see. That would be a threat, which cancels out one of these, so I would turn it to just be 1. And I succeeded with good stuff in that roll that I didn't make very challenging for myself. But in general, that's sort of the idea. They cancel things out based on what they are. And obviously you want successes, you want good stuff. You don't want the bad stuff to happen to you, you want the good stuff to happen to you. What a role-playing game, eh? But that's sort of the idea of the way your skills work with your characteristics. You have essentially soak. In combat, you would roll with your combat skills. You have soak, which would absorb damage. You have wounds, which is actually like your HP. You have strain, which is something like a lesser version, like non-lethal, I suppose. Then you have defense, which I forget because this character didn't have any. I'm pretty sure armor gave you extra soak, so I'm not sure 100% on that. Melee and range, I don't know. That might have applied something. Wasn't even on here. I'm not sure. Then of course the back of the character sheet had spots for your actual talents from your class, information on your character, equipment, just information. So that's sort of what the character sheet looks like, and I would pair it up with this to make things nice and easy. And we have the actual rulebook itself. Which is, 400 and some odd pages. It is a big book with art. And we get our table of contents here. Anyways, I just want to go over some basic things in it. They do begin it by explaining those dice and how they work. And the general idea behind the game, sort of like I just did, as well as a bit more. And then you go into character creation. And one of the things that you do in character creation is the obligation, which is actually duty in the Age of Rebellion, like what your duty is. But essentially it is you have something, it is what the Game Master uses to tie you into the plot. At least that's what my Game Master used it for. But yeah, so that's, they have information on obligation and play and all that. I'm gonna zoom this out a little bit. Yeah, it's a bit better. Alright, but yeah, so that was that. And then you get, species. Select a species. There are different species in the different books. I believe droid and human, at the very least, are in both of them. But I don't believe either of those are in the other, in the Age of Rebellion. Although there are also races in supplemental books and things. So there's always choices there. But essentially you get your race, which will set what your beginning characteristics are, and will give you essentially some other information. Perhaps special abilities, starting experience, which is how you buy things during character creation. So depending on how good, if the race is really good, it will give you less starting experience. If it's not as good, like as written, it gives you more. So it's essentially how customized your character is in general. But yeah, you have races and information on each of those. And then you choose a career and specialization. That is essentially your class, and there are two different sections of it for how you can jump around. Essentially, like, I'll just do the first one in here. Bounty Hunter would be your career. And Bounty Hunter would give you certain skills as career skills. And then depending on which specialization, which you could either use the Assassin, Gadgeteer, or Survivalist. I believe is all, yeah. And those would give you additional career skills, and also what tree you have. One of the other guys I played with made a note for me to point out. Early on, they try to make they have this big tree with all these options, and they try and make it feel sort of like this is where you get a bunch of things. But most of these add minor stuff, or like the minor dice in very rare situations. And for the most part, at least early on in building your character, until you have a whole bunch of points and skills, you just sort of ignore this and put points into skills, or you rush down this to dedication. However, whatever, you have to follow the lines, so this one's actually a pretty easy one. But yeah, essentially rush it down to dedication in order to increase this, because early on the idea is you really want to increase your dice. But yeah, so And they each have experience costs, and essentially you have the starting experience, and you also get experience after each session. The Game Master can award experience. But essentially, yeah, there's colonists and explorers, hired gun, smuggler, technician. Is there any more? Yeah. So that, yeah, those are the different careers, each with 3 specializations of their own, and they get information about them, what their role is, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, they have whatever, how you spend experience at the beginning. At character creation, you can spend experience on characteristics. That's the only time you can do it. Otherwise, and there's different costs, you can spend experience to increase your skills, to get new careers or specializations, and to get the talents on the trees within them, which have, each row 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 for what their cost is. So that's the different things that you could do with experience, both in character creation and in leveling up. But yeah, and of course some of those values, the soak, all that. Defense is how difficult the character is to hit in combat situations. Okay, so it is gained by wearing armor, so that's what defense is. Okay, I was wrong. I guess my guy wasn't wearing any armor. Maybe? I don't know. Anyways, but yeah, so that's what that defense was that this character didn't use. But yeah, you determine motivations for your character and how those use in play. You get gear. Forget exactly. It says somewhere, I believe, how much money you start with. 500 credits worth of gear. And the idea, a lot of times, is your party as a whole would have a ship. Anyways, they have further sections on more detail on what the skills do. And then they actually have the talents themselves broken down by name in here, as opposed to looking at them in the trees that they're in. Glare. And of course we get to gear and equipment, which has some great stuff in it, but at times also some confusing stuff. The rarity and cost increase and all of that had essentially confused my gaming group enough that for quite some time we ended up running the game where instead of buying and selling with credits, we just collected all of the blasters, blaster rifles, blaster pistols, etc. from everyone we killed, and we bartered. We were arms merchants with the guns of people we killed, and that was what we used for currency, because it was easier than dealing with the different rarities in different star systems, and how that affected prices, or however that's supposed to work. I'm not sure. They seemed rather sure of it, and it seemed really confusing. I never did understand it. It's a big book. I don't know. A lot of it, it's like, if I wouldn't have ran it, that's sort of what I ended up with, was I didn't feel like running it. It's so complex, but I have enjoyed playing it. Anyways, they have your different weapons, different armors, and then, equipment. You watch the Star Wars movies, you see all sorts of stuff. Most of that in here, as well as stuff that you haven't. Of course, the jetpack from Jango Fett. And then, of course, being able to customize and modify your weapons. One of the other things one of the other players wanted to point out is that there are attachments, which are just costs, how you attach it, and then there are actually modifications, which it gives you a skill check for mechanics to do, but absolutely no price to hire somebody to do it. So, as written, you cannot ever pay somebody to use a skill that you obviously someone could have. You can only do it yourself. Which doesn't make much sense. They just don't have the rules. They just sort of skipped over it in here. My comment was, well, that's really up to the Game Master then. So, what's the Game Master going to do? Alright, then we get to this conflict and combat section, which I sort of explained combat before. But yeah, successes are, you have to succeed to hit, and they add to the damage, which I believe, so your weapon would have a base damage usually, and then this would add to the damage. And your weapon might also have a number of advantages that it takes in order to do a critical hit, or if you get a triumph, you can automatically do a critical hit. And there's all sorts of other options other than just shooting things, but the only character I had that was really combat focused was a sniper who was really trigger happy, because essentially we played 2 games. The first one I was a pilot, and that went weeks and weeks, and I didn't get to do a single attack. I never got into combat. I was a pilot and a diplomat, and the rest of the party were all aggressive, and I never fought. I was usually waiting in our ship and coming and picking them up after the fight. So when we created the next character, I created a highly aggressive sniper that was just going to shoot them, and I did. I proved in our very first encounter that I was fine and would quickly dispatch of every enemy. Even the one that the game master sort of gave an excuse to try and drive off in a speeder. I was like, well, alright, so how much more difficult is it? Alright, I'm gonna make that check and try and get that. And I killed him. No one got away. We take care of everyone. But as I said, yeah, you can activate things for advantages and such for criticals. And criticals actually use percentile dice. There are certain things, and one of the things that the talents are good for is some of them add to this, so you could go further on this chart because it's a D100, but it goes up to 151. So you have to have things adding to it to get all the way there, which is just, that critical is dead. But there's maimed and compromised and whatever, minor, just extra things that happen on different, severities of critical injuries. So, that was another fun part of combat. Of course, recovery and healing for how you get over combat afterwards. Then we get our starships and vehicles. Which starts here. Let's see. Let's see. And it gives all sorts of different options for flying ships in combat with each other, which I didn't get to do that either as my pilot. We never had ship-to-ship combat. It just wasn't planned in that story, I suppose. But then it gets into the actual vehicle profiles, which are the vehicles themselves. From air speeders to land speeders, wheeled and tracked vehicles. It's a very short section because there aren't many in the way of vehicles with wheels in Star Wars. They just only few and far between different species ever invented the wheel. Everyone else seems to have just skipped right onto hover technology. Anyways, walkers, and then starships. Yay, starships. Let's see, which one was mine? I forget. Anyways, yeah, they had, I don't know, it was, I think that one. I think that was the ship I had in the game when I was the server. But essentially, they have the different ships with their stats, and they work similar to characters, but with obviously their own information. And there are very big starships and smaller ones, and then there's modifications for starships as well. Much as the Millennium Falcon was a modified, why can't I remember it? Whatever. YT-1300 Light Freighter. Anyways, yeah, it's a modified starship. You can modify yours as well. They do have a section on the Force. There's a whole nother, the third full game will be on Force using characters, but there's a small section on the Force. There is a universal specialization, which is like career specialization combined, that gives you some Force use stuff, different Force powers, etc. I don't exactly know how it works. I never used it. I was not a Force user in either of them, and neither were any of the other characters, at least not visibly. In the second game, which we've just started, where I'm the sniper, is one Force user, but he hasn't actually used. He's sort of like in hiding, so it's not well known, and I'm not exactly sure how it works. And then there's the Game Master section, which, as I've not been Game Mastering, I don't know a whole bunch about it, what's in here at all, but it seems to go over information from a different angle, as one might expect from a Game Master section. Using obligation, which is that thing that I said that my Game Master has been using to tie us into the plot itself. Running a campaign, Hyperspace Railroad, whatever. We're almost there. And then we get to the galaxy. Now we're on to what is stuff from the world, which is the Star Wars universe. And we generally get the idea of what that map looks like, and then we have the map of the galaxy. Which, having had several different Star Wars games, I've seen several different maps, all more or less the same, but from slightly different angles. But anyways, it's divided: core, colonies, inner rim, expansion region, mid-rim, outer rim, and unknown regions, with all the different spaces, wild space, and I'm sure where's Hut Space? Hut Space has got it. Hut Space is up here on this map, and just the different systems that are in between it, what the hyperspace lanes are that connect them, etc., etc. And then they go, whatever, deep core, what's there, notable locations, core worlds, what's in those, colonies, inner rim, expansion region, mid-rim, outer rim territories, which has all of these. And they just sort of give brief descriptions of the different systems for each one. Then they go into also hut space, because this game has a decent amount of hut space stuff. Notable locations within hut space. Corporate sector, other notable locations, and for some planets within systems, they actually give full breakdowns, including, what you sort of see as you're flying in on a ship, and, astronavigation data, orbital metrics, government, population, languages, etc., etc., and the background of it, Cloud City, and information on the actual planets themselves, or asteroid, or whatever it is. Tatooine. So yeah, they give information on planets, which is great for actually running the game. And then they give this Law and Society section, which is pretty much organizations. I'm pretty sure what fits in this spot in the Age of the Republic book is actually information on Age of Rebellion book is information on the rebellion itself. In this one, we get, alliances to restore the Republic. We get information on the Hutts and that organization. And then we get whatever pirates and other groups, the different, Imperial Law, where it reaches to, sectors and zones, and outside the law, and all that stuff for the black market, etc. All that stuff for the different law and etc., how these different organizations interact. So it's world info again. The adversary section is, there are minions, rivals, and nemesises. And essentially those are the three different power levels of how difficult the guys are going to be, essentially. And there's just a whole bunch of different, slavers, shipjackers, pirate captains, smugglers, comm operator, mechanics, bounty hunters, etc. Just different, people that you can fight, including droids. That's actually where you get... Back here, by the way, if ever you want to purchase droids, you'd think probably in the equipment section. Wrong. It is way back here in the adversaries section, is where, along with the stats for the droids, that is where you find information on costs and rarities for different type of droids, as well as their stats. So it's right back here. And it took me forever, because I had a character that owned a droid, and it took forever to find it. But that's where you do it. And then they do end, actually, with this Trouble Brewing, which is a little pre-made adventure path. So, as a game master, if you want to, if that's the kind of thing you like, which also has looks like some extra adversaries for it specifically, and then its index. And the different sheets, by the way. Because there's the character sheet, but there's also a sheet for your ship, a sheet for base of operations, and then advertisement. So yeah, so there's 2 extra sheets other than that. Other than just the character sheet. So the group sheet and the vehicle sheet. So yeah, that is a hefty tome, as it were, with all sorts of stuff. Not always the best organized, not always the clearest writing, a lot of flavor, well supported by various books and supplements. It is a tool to tell a story. If the game master is really hampered by, alright, I have to find in the book exactly where it says how this rule works, it can take a lot of time of them looking through. If they're fine to say, I don't know, and just make it up as they go, keep the story going, maybe look it up later, if your game master can do that, it works well. And they do work well together. Ultimately, one thing I want to point out that I love is I like the idea of having more than one book at the table, because all of a sudden, a time of, oh, you just got experience. Everyone needs the book at once. It's annoying. So you end up with multiple books. But at the very least this way, or if you're trying to look up rules and the game master is doing something, you can have multiple rule books for different people to be using, but you're not buying the same book over and over again. You're getting slightly different variations with slightly different things. And so they work well for that. I really liked that, just as far as an idea for how to put out a role-playing system. The actual rules themselves are duplicated between them, but the exact information about information about the world you get is different. But yeah, I mean, it's been a fun system. The character folio from the beginner box has been very useful, just so I can look at it and tell, all right, this is what the dice mean, because the dice work really well, as long as you don't spend too long trying to figure out what means what. In general, the good dice only has good symbols, the bad dice only has bad symbols, so it's not really that difficult to memorize. But, so essentially you're remembering whatever. There's one symbol that's obviously only on the the higher dice, and it is the really good or really bad one. And then there's the good stuff, bad stuff on each one, and the success, fail on each one. So really there's 4 symbols is all you're really trying to remember that aren't just obvious by looking at it. But it's nice to have the chart over to the side. I've just enjoyed it. Especially good early on. But ultimately, if as a game master you get the box, I think there's 4 characters in there. So for 4 players, you can hand one to each. But yeah, so if you're looking to play Star Wars and you want one that's currently supported, because of course there are the couple old Wizards ones, and there are Wizards of the Coast Star Wars games, and there are Star Wars games before that, if I remember correctly. There are before even I started playing any. But ultimately, these are good as far as what is currently supported. Stuff still coming out. I think I heard that they even got, whenever they renewed their license, and it included stuff from The Force Awakens that they could do. So after this new Force book comes out that is like Force users during the Age of the Empire and Rebellion, which would be in hiding, they might do another series that takes place at a different time period and even be, something else in the other movies. They've not announced it, but I'm kind of, if they're renewing their license, they might have further plans. So I'm interested to see how that goes. But in general, yeah, ultimately all you need is one book to check it out. Or even the beginner game has a pre-made adventure if you just really want to check out the system itself. I didn't play in the pre-made adventure from the beginner game, but I know the other guys that I played with did that over just sort of one evening, I think, or a long evening, I guess, but they just played through the pre-made adventure to get to know the system, and that's what made them decide, all right, we're going to go through a full game, and it was at that point that I actually joined in. But yeah, you can check it out. I'll put a link where you can find the books for stuff in the description below, or at least my local gaming stores all seem to be carrying at least some of the supplements. But there is so much stuff to support it, so yeah, you could probably find at least some of it there. Otherwise, online, check it out. Have a great day. Bye.